Do you remember your sex education? Was it helpful to you? Was it filled with scientific information rather than real, practical advice? I'm Diggory, and this is The Real Sex Education. Each week, I'll be joined by a guest. We'll impart our own sex wisdom, ask our own sex questions, and we'll go over all the things they don't teach you in school. To bring this all together, though, we'll need an expert, a sexpert, if you will. But the only sex and relationship therapist I know is my mum. Hello, Mum.
Hello, Diggs.
In this episode, we speak to Poppy J and Rubina and Pabani.
This is like the perfect podcast for us to be on.
We talk about the risks of hosting a sex podcast.
2 of my sisters found out, and they didn't talk to me for like nearly a year.
Sex dreams.
I literally went up to a table of people and I said, does anyone want to have sex with me?
Polyamory.
You're setting boundaries, you know who you are, you know what you want.
And sexual fantasies.
I sometimes worry if there's a limit or a line, or being turned on by something a little bit weird and being like, that's just weird, that's just a lamp.
Hello and welcome to The Real Sex Education. I'm Diggory, and as ever, I'm joined by accredited sex and relationship therapist, Cate Campbell. Hello, Mum.
Hello, Diggs.
Every episode, Mum and I give sex and relationships a good going over with a guest. Or, in today's case, guests. Yes, Mum, you get the carriage door and I'll roll out the red carpet for podcasting royalty. We're so glad to welcome Poppy and Rubina from the award-winning Brown Girls Do It Too podcast. It's a great podcast. They're great guests. Mum, what did you like about them?
Oh, everything. They're so honest and funny and committed and really committed to the cause of sex therapy for South Asian women. I just love them. They're great.
They're so good. We had such a good time.
Could have talked to them forever.
We could have done. And to be honest, I wish we had. But that would have meant that we didn't get to talk to you guys. So it's fine. Let's talk sex education. As this is the real sex education, we want to get some sex education in early as possible. And I was flicking through the index of your latest book, Mum. What's the name of
that? Contemporary Sex Therapy.
Very good. I was flicking through the index of Contemporary Sex Therapy by Cate Campbell, book out now, to look for stuff to talk about on the podcast, to educate people and to educate myself. And I came across a number of things that I'm sure we'll get onto in the coming weeks. But one word I saw that I didn't recognise was sexomnia.
Sexomnia, yes.
What is sexomnia?
Well, it's a very interesting phenomenon whereby people initiate sexual behaviour in their sleep. So if they're on their own, they might masturbate. They're genuinely fast asleep, so they don't know they're doing this. And sometimes they start to have sex with their partner in their sleep. Now, I first came across it when clients brought it, and I didn't know very much about it because it's only relatively recently been recognised. So since about 2007, and now it is a recognised sleep disorder. And what happens is that sometimes people will initiate sex with their partner will wake up and think that their partner is awake and wants to have sex. They start responding. That wakes up the one who started the whole thing. And the one who started the whole thing gets really angry and says, how dare you assault me in my sleep? So that this poor person says, but you were making love to me. And they say, I certainly was not. I was fast asleep and you just assaulted me. And this has happened quite a lot, and it causes all sorts of relationship issues, as you can imagine. But it is something that can be treated. But it's not a sexual disorder, it's a sleep disorder. It's not as uncommon as people imagine. I mean, given the number of people that I've seen who have this experience, it is not that. But it really worries people, as you can imagine. But it's more common in people who have other sleep disturbances like sleepwalking and people with sleep apnea and things like that. There are several fixes for these things, which once you treat the sleep disorder, the problem goes away. But not every GP knows about this. So you need to probably inform them if they don't know. But it is a known condition and people can get help with it.
Wow. Well, I mean, I feel suitably educated after that. which is great. But it doesn't end there. After our discussion with Rubina and Poppy, in just a bit, we open our mailbox and it's your chance to have your questions answered by Cate, an accredited sex and relationships therapist. I mean, you've just seen her credentials there. Sexomnia. Who'd heard of that? Not me. You can send in your queries to podcasts@hatchet.com. That's Hatchet with 2 T's, or by using the hashtag #RealSexEdu. That's RealSexEDU. Right, that's enough of me. It's time to welcome Poppy and Rubina to the show, to ask them about their sex education and to hear what they made of my regal introduction for them.
Podcast royalty. What an intro.
So
God.
good.
I might steal
and this
that.
is like the perfect podcast for us to be on, because we always go on about how we are completely not sexperts and we're fumbling our way through our sex lives. So this is where we need to be. Thanks for having us.
Well, that's the thing, because usually we start the podcast by asking people, what was your sex education like? But obviously, Mum and I have listened to your podcast. Thousands of others have as well. They know it was crap, right? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, totally.
Sex when I was growing up was like, you know, when you play like Mario Kart and like like the highest level, like level 64, that was sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just like listened to like people our age when we were like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
I got my sex education from a 9-year-old.
Yeah, you said that. What was that?
Well, it was in Islamic school when I was 9, and this is so awful. But I remember it was a really sunny day and I'd learned about sex and this like disgusting thing that my parents had done that made me, I was like, ugh. And I went home and I sort of like judged my mum, and I just like saw her as like dirty, and it was awful. Like I really regret that. But so it was crap. It was crap, and it was sort of internalized misogyny and patriarchy. And I mean, that was pretty much my sex education.
And was it the same for you, Rubina?
Yeah, I guess sex was always something silly and fun, and something that is always naughty, and like, you know, you wouldn't really ever do it, so it's not really part of your life. And that's why I think a lot of like British Asian people lose their virginity so late as well, because it feels like quite distant from you, like you're not supposed to, and then you just, everything you find out through porn, through whisperings, through kind of crap lies and stories that people tell at school.
Through fellow 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting that you mentioned British Asian people. Were there some things that were specific to those communities that were different in terms of sex education and stuff?
I think it depends what kind. I mean, we use British Asian really like openly, me and Poppy, because we're like trying to represent, which we should. But also, you know, like Poppy and I, we grew up in very different parts of London with very different Muslim households. So like even comparatively, it's very different. But I think religion, a lot of us grew up in quite religious conservative houses. We're also from countries that are still quite patriarchal and families that are huge and patriarchal as well. So like us having any say in women talking about their bodies, women talking about self-pleasure, anything like that, it's just non-existent. Nothing. Silence was basically what you were supposed to have around sex. And my mum used to have this phrase where if you said anything like around sex or swearing, you know, she said, I'll wash your mouth out with chili, because it was like this thing that you were not allowed to do. So for us, like doing the podcast was like such a big deal for us, because we were like, well, let's just do it and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I think now is the perfect time to explain to people, if people haven't listened, firstly, what you're doing, but secondly, explain to people who may not have listened what the podcast is and what it's about, because it goes completely in some ways against what you've just been saying, you know, about it being conservative, don't talk about sex, etc.
Yeah, and maybe we go too far because we're rebelling.
We always go too far.
So we talk about sex, but we talk about it through the prism of our race, of our culture, of identity. We are not self-hating brown people. We love our cultures. Our food is way better than yours. We are definitely proud British Asians, but we do acknowledge that in our communities this is an issue, and we would like to do some fun chat around not being experts and just sharing our experience as a way for us to learn from each other and to help some other people know that they're also normal.
But it's interesting, with that more conservative places that you're coming from, what has the reception been like to the podcast?
So we got quite a lot of trolls. Like Rubina said, the line was here and then we always went over the line.
Yeah.
But we did get really incredible messages of support from young women saying, I wish I'd had this when I was growing up. You've normalized it. I don't feel embarrassed. I don't feel ashamed. The reception within my family wasn't so great. 2 of my sisters found out a clip had been shared on an Instagram page that I was then trolled, and then they found out that way. And I should have messaged them. You know, we've got a WhatsApp group, but I just do want to say, hey, I'm doing a sex podcast. These are my Kimmy K sex tapes. I just wanted to call them up individually and explain to them. And I just didn't get round to it. It's my fault. So they found out in this horrible way. And they didn't talk to me for like nearly a year.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So they went on the biggest journey, because they stopped talking to me, hated me, and like, why are you doing this? To, they are now on the podcast and they talk about their journey and they're like, this is why I was upset with you. This is why I couldn't understand. Like, and it was just something simple. For one of them, it was just simple as, I wish you'd told me. I found out through friends, through people that I'm mutual friends with on Instagram. And so I'm really proud of them, and I'm proud of the journey they've experienced within. And there's so many sex podcasts, there's so many sex and relationship podcasts in that genre. But I always say this, like, I think the stakes for us were always a bit higher. The fact that two of my sisters who we squabble, but we've never not talked for a year. And certainly, like, Rubina's mum is incredible. Can she adopt me?
Yeah, I guess
because she went through a similar-ish kind of journey, didn't she? She's like the coolest 73-year-old I know.
Yeah, she's amazing. I mean, it took her a while to really get her head around that. I mean, you got to remember, like, British Asian women in the media, they're seen on the news, they're seen in like very specific, certain and quite serious roles. And what Poppy and I are trying to do is, I kind of joke that we're going to be like Ant and Dec, but we are much more of the
and
entertainment.
I'm like, come up with a better reference. What's wrong with you? They're so uncool.
They are so uncool. But I guess we're trying to do something like funny and snappy and kind of straight talking, and we don't want any kind of academic research behind what we're doing. We're just sharing experiences because we think that's valid and enough. I mean, I would love to do a podcast like you with my mum. That would be amazing. And when I recorded the little bit for our podcast, it was just like so revealing that this 70-year-old woman who also has desires and has had sexual partners and like had never been able to talk about this stuff. And it took her ages to be like, wow, actually what you're doing, I can now see is just as important as a brown woman reading the news, as a brown woman who's a lawyer, as a brown woman who's all of those other things. And she now sees the value in it, which is great. It's
interesting too that listening to the podcast, I was a bit surprised that it didn't sound as though anybody who got married got any advice from a sister or a mother or anything like that. Because you talk about wishing someone had given you the lube talk. It just astonished me that there wasn't anybody to kind of put an arm around you, because it sounds really frightening.
Yeah, and especially when you're expected to be a bloody virgin on your wedding night, which I was. So you're really fumbling around in the dark. And then your sex education from a 9-year-old then graduates to getting sex education from your fellow 19-year-old, who is also as clueless as you are. And then you're like, great, back to the Bollywood movies I go. Very, very unhealthy. And that's it. At least I had that 9-year-old. I mean, what did my mum have? I mean, it must have been insane to, like, and I say this in the podcast, like my head was beating and my heart was beating in my head. I'd never had that experience in my life, because I was like, oh my God, I'm about to have sex. It was such a big thing. And
it was level 64.
Level 64!
65.
65, exactly.
Not quite 69.
You got there eventually. It's fine. That's when you started branching out and having fun with it. Yeah.
And then I was like, this feels amazing. What? Again, not that deep. Should have started 5-10 years ago, whatever.
Because you talked about that, Mum, as well, in sex therapy, that often you'll have clients who waited till marriage, and often there's a few problems because people don't really know what they're doing,
And do you find that you get lots of South Asian clients, like British Asian people coming to you with their problems, or is that a community that feels quite untapped in terms of getting help and like vocalizing things?
No, there are some. And what's interesting is they quite often, couples that often arrive not having had sex and being paid for by relatives.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they want them to consummate the relationship. So that's always really awkward, because you think, well, how much do these people want to know? A colleague of mine said that quite often a relative would actually attend therapy with them the first time, and they'd have to send them away.
Wow.
Because they wanted to
Asians
see
are so fucking overbearing, aren't they?
Well,
sitting here and listening to everything.
You guys talk of fantasies. Don't worry.
But it's lovely. It's really sweet. But a lot of people don't have any idea, who want sex therapy. They don't have any idea about sex at all. They've got no idea of anatomy or anything, which is, which you would think would be very unusual in this modern day. But it still happens.
Yeah, I can see the relative thing. I guess British Asians often come from huge families and see themselves as a part of a community. We're not individuals. With that kind of individualistic thing doesn't really exist. You represent your family, and so your family would come into every room with you and try and solve every problem with you, which is wonderful for so many different levels of our lives, and we feel very supported by the multi-layers of our family. And then terrible for things like sex, because no way is the group going to come together and talk to you about. Like, there are good and bad bits of that.
you guys talk about so much in your podcast. I want to ask you two questions. One, is there something on the podcast that you haven't, on yours, you've discussed so much that you haven't talked about yet that you want to talk about maybe here? And also, because Mum's a sex therapist, is there anything you'd like to ask her now that you've got one in the room?
We sometimes worry that because we are both, as you say, quite sexual, we think about sex a lot, we love to talk about sex, we love to have sex, we are definitely open and honest about that. I sometimes worry if there's a limit or a line, or if there is a point when actually thinking about sex while I'm in a meeting at work, probably not a good idea, or being turned on by something a little bit weird and being like, that's just weird, that's just a lamp. Why am I? Do you know what I mean? Like, is there any lines where you would say actually there isn't an unhealthy amount that you can?
No,
I'd be interested to know.
I mean, we're all trying to turn up the volume on people's sexual experiencing rather than turn it down. So no, there isn't a line. I mean, what you're doing in your head is your business, isn't it? It's not upsetting anybody else. Yeah,
completely.
So go for it.
Shag that lamp.
yeah. Well, again, in your head, let's. I'm looking at one now, and I'm very protective all of a sudden.
There is stuff on our podcast that we'll be doing in series 2 that I think we're both a bit like, is that crossing a line? Because when it comes to fantasies and things like rape fantasies and things that put you in a bit more of a. Poppy and I do like to be dominated, and we do talk about that. And there are lines within that where we're like, how do we talk about that safely with our mouths and our humour, which make us feel irresponsible? So there's a few like lines that we've been having kind of moral discussions about and where we're going to go with that. And that is something I would love to know as well, because I think I'm always worried about my sex thoughts and minds. So that's probably like the health thing was something that I was interested in, because it's like, how far can a fantasy be dangerous and how much,
It's fine. If it's a fantasy, isn't it? It can't hurt anybody. And rape fantasies are incredibly common, and they don't hurt anybody. And a lot of sexual fantasies are ways of sorting stuff out as well. It's a bit like dreaming. You can have a fantasy where you actually put things right in your head. So fear of actual rape or having had a sexual abuse in the past can actually be put right through fantasizing. You can actually help yourself quite a bit by imagining you being, because it's your fantasy, you're in control of what happens and you can make anything happen. And so it can be really, really therapeutic to have rape fantasies, actually, because it's something that people are frightened of. And I'm hearing at the moment about people having coronavirus fantasies, which absolutely blows my mind. But it is about people getting I was going to say getting on top of, but I have to be careful. But coming to terms with something that really frightens them, and what safer place in a way to do it than through your sexual fantasizing.
That's so interesting. I have these dreams, right? I mean, everyone has dreams, but recently, when I'm stressed, I have quite a lot of dreams and I dream all the time. And sometimes I can control the direction of my dreams, which I'm sure lots of people can relate to, when it's going somewhere dark and you want to take it somewhere else. And the place that I always take it is I'm like, just have sex with somebody in the dream, try and have sex with them. Because in my dreams...
That's exactly what I do!
Oh my God!
Everything ends in sex! I dream all the fucking time. It's exhausting. I wake up exhausted. I do the same thing. I'm like giving a speech. I'm like, just have sex with them. Just have sex with them. Everything ends in sex.
My last dream that I had, I was in like this piazza in Italy, and it was just like there was tables everywhere around me, and I was like, I didn't really know what was happening, and I was like, okay, well, the best thing to do is just. I literally went up to a table of people, and I said, does anyone want to have sex with me? And I ended up having sex with someone in the toilet in this like Italian restaurant in my dream, and I was like, what is that about? I mean, what is that about?
I always my troubleshooting is having sex. Like I could be having a nightmare, I could be in a meeting, I could be at work, it could be really mundane, or it could be like quite intense, and I'm like, just have sex with them. Unfortunately though, I don't have that degree of like lucid dreaming where I can control the dream. One time I was dreaming about having sex with Keanu Reeves, and my fucking sister burst into the room, and I was so mad at her. I was like, well, I'm now never going to be able to finish this ever. And I'm still cut up about it because it happened in 97.
This is really weird and maybe oversharing, but I had exactly the same thing, but I was watching Will Smith have sex with someone else, and it was amazing. Yeah, and I identify as a straight man, and yet Will Smith was very much the centre of that.
Who was he having sex with?
No idea. Nice. She was very beautiful as well.
Yeah, see, I identify as straight, but I have sex dreams about all sorts of other escapades. Like I've been in an orgy, I've been gangbanged in my dream. I mean, this is all because I watch porn. I reckon a lot of things just filter through. But, I've done everything in my dream. My dream self is more fun than my real self.
My dream self is way more fun than my real self.
Well, this is okay. I lucid dreamt once, and I remember realizing that I was dreaming, that I could control the dream, and I was like, "This is the most amazing thing ever." So you guys have it all the time. I'm insanely jealous. But the problem was then, obviously, like you guys did, my instant thought was, "What do I do?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll fly," obviously, which I did. But I got like 15 feet off the ground, and then my brain just went, "You can't fly, you idiot!" And I was like, and I started floating back down. I was like, "No!" And then I was like, the girl that I fancied at the time, I was like, right, I'll imagine her. And she was in front of me, and I was like, right, I'm going to have sex with her. And I tried to kiss her, and then my brain was like, she wouldn't kiss you. And she was like, what are you doing? And so my dream subconscious brain...
You're cock-blocking yourself in your dream. What is wrong with you? Come on.
I know, it's awful. This is why, so when I'm hearing you guys be like, oh yeah, I just bang a table of, in an Italian restaurant, I'm like, I'm so jealous.
Honestly, it is my go-to. I do exactly the same.
I don't think I've ever told anyone that I dream like that, but I really do. It's like really common for me to just end every dream in sex, because I'm like, oh, this will save it. This will like solve whatever issue is going on here.
I sometimes force it in a consensual way in my dream, but then I wake up and I'm like, oh, great, I've missed the big final act. I could have watched myself having sex or just had sex.
Also, like, I don't think people talk about women having wet dreams enough, because like I definitely wake up moist. Maybe that's an overshare, but 100%. And I'm like, what was that? Because I definitely feel like I woke up like I've just orgasmed. Is that possible? Is that...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. A lot of people only orgasm in their sleep.
Wow, really?
But how do they know they're orgasming?
Yeah.
Well, I guess they dream that they do, and then they wake up and they think, oh, there's evidence that I did.
Kate, I wanted to ask you, this is sort of more broad, but like as a sex therapist, are there like cycles and trends? Are there things that you've seen in the sort of last 5-10 years that are quite telling of the kind of society that we live in? Maybe it be about porn. I mean, the coronavirus thing is very much of our time now, isn't it?
But yes, you said porn. Yes, porn is a big issue. Either very liberating for people or a big problem. It is definitely causing some problems for some people, men and women. So, and there's also, at the moment, there's a lot more polyamory around as well.
Right, really?
Which is really interesting.
Have you seen an increase?
Is it absolutely huge increase, especially in the over 60s.
Oh, good for them.
Fucking good for them. That's great.
Love that.
Isn't it?
Would you guys consider polyamory if you're not already in a polyamorous relationship?
I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't think so. Do you know what's bad is that I've seen a few documentaries on polyamory, obviously the one that like Louis Theroux did as well, and it always felt like someone in this throuple or whatever was always a bit upset, and they weren't quite there for it.
But you could always be upset in a monogamous relationship.
That's true. That is true.
You could so be in a monogamous relationship and be forever disappointed or not happy or not in love.
When there's abuse, when somebody's actually just wanting to have loads of affairs and the other partner doesn't agree, then of course there's going to be problems. And it's the same with things like kink. If you don't organise it properly, that's not going to work. I mean, with anything sexual or relationship related. But where you've properly boundaried everything and where you've got rules, then why should there be a problem? Everyone knows what's going on. And I think with older people, it's more likely because they don't have the same trajectory as younger people who want to buy their first home, have a baby. Once you've done all that, then what's the point?
And you sort of know what you like and what you don't like.
Exactly.
By that point. You've tried all these things, and also, I mean, just in the way that you live, rather than just the bedroom, just in the way that you live. You're like, I like to get up in the morning. I like to read the paper, have a coffee. I don't like anything to ruin that. Meanwhile, this partner that I wants me to stay in bed with them and, I don't know, fumble around. I'm like...
Well, they might want you to go to Tesco or something, which would be really boring.
Bullshit. And that's why I'm going to be polyamorous and pick my girlfriend for the morning, my girlfriend for the afternoon.
That's it.
Yeah.
I don't know about Rubina, but I would definitely consider it within, consensual and boundaries. And I think never say never. I actually think polyamory is the future. And I've been saying this, Kate, for ages. And I think you've just kind of reinforced something that I've been thinking about society as a whole. Like, you have all these dating apps and we've got like this paradox of choice and people like consume relationships in different ways. I think that if done in the right way, like, absolutely. I'm not saying it's the answer to relationships, but it's definitely an alternative perspective. But whenever I talk to my monogamous friends about it, they're like, what? It's like, chill out.
Yeah.
you're being responsible, you're setting boundaries, and also you know who you are, you know what you want. You might want to dip into a part-time relationship. You know, when you're young, you're kind of consumed with passion, and like you said, you have these defining points in life: house, baby, blah blah blah.
It would be good if you started off like that. Like, I've been in a relationship for a while, and I can't imagine having that discussion now where I'm like, let's project that, because I don't think either of us are looking that way at the moment. We're not thinking about it. But maybe if I had started out and been like, I was always seeing lots of people, to be honest, I was always seeing lots of people, but, you know, like properly seeing lots of people, and that was just all, everyone was communicating, it was fine. The other thing I'm really interested in is, like, in relationships, like the power dynamic in relationships. So there's two of you. I often think, like, power shifts, doesn't it? Occasionally, or one person's dominating, one person knows what we're doing, and the other one is figuring it out. And then what happens in polyamory with power? Like, who is like, is there a lead? Is there a kind of, does it work like that? Is there kind of a system? I guess every kind of group has its own rules, but there must be somebody who's pushing the pusher.
Well, no, not if it's really working. Not if it's what both of a couple want, rather than what one person wants and is pushing onto the other. Then that's not okay. That's abusive. It has to be something that they both want, or that they're cool with from the beginning. And when you think about it, so many people have lots and lots of sex with their partner before they decide to call it a relationship, and lots of people have lots of other partners at the same time. So there's a lot of that sort of thing understood and going on. We just don't label it polyamory. We just say, oh, we're not in a relationship yet, but actually, it's what it is.
I'm going to sound like a proper bloke here when I say this. Back in the day, let's pretend I'm King Henry VIII. You know, I've got my wife who, you know, I want to make loads of children with, but I also have my mistresses for all the sex stuff. I've got my best mate for, you know, having fun. I've got my jester who makes me laugh. You know, I've got my different people for the different roles in my life. And now what we do is we put those all into one, who's meant to be your significant other partner. And it's not saying that's wrong, but I'm just saying that, like you were saying, Poppy, like the way that maybe we're going these days with lots of choice, and, you know, it's not completely crazy to think, well, maybe we could have different people for different roles.
Oh, I need different people. I can't do a one-stop shop in a partner. No, no. I love
there's
my
people
partner.
there's people who say, like, my partner's my best friend. It's like, get a best friend, because that is wrong.
Get a best
like, that's just
friend.
not right.
And it's okay for your partner to be your best friend, but, like, I need different people. Like you, like you said, I need the jester, I need the fun friends, I need the holiday friends, I need the getting smashed friends, I need the intellectual friends, I need the you know, I just need, you know, I get my energy from people. Oh, sorry, I sound like a wanker, but I do need different groups of people for different things to satiate different parts of my personality. Like when I'm with my partner for more than 3 hours, I'm like, we definitely need time apart. And I've noticed in friends who work together and spend every waking minute together, they self-implode those relationships. Like it's intense and it's great, but they don't have a long shelf life. I've noticed it. And I'm sure there are people who will disprove this theory I have. But I just think, like, what is the point of life?
Do you think it's the same in sex then? Like, you need multiple people to satisfy different parts of your sexual being?
Well, I was going to talk to you guys. So I am not there, but both of us are very much in a very long-term relationship. I think people don't talk about long-term relationships. They're hard work. Like, I have never been more in love with my partner, and lockdown, I think, has definitely got us closer. But, like, you're sort of operating different parameters, aren't you, in long-term relationships? Because that magic and that newness is gone. You do get other things like friendship, and you sort of know each other and you finish each other's sentences, and it's very cute. But that sexual drive and that newness and that freshness and that raw energy, it's gone, and it's replaced by something else. And you've got to keep topping it up, and you've got to keep topping it up. And I think that in the world that we live in now is definitely quite challenging, I think.
Well, if you were in Europe, you'd probably be cool with an affair.
I'm just going to call my partner and be like, let's move to London.
She's cool with it. We're cool with it.
Yeah.
I definitely have said to him, you know, if we don't have kids, which we might not, you know, we're just going to have each other. So we do need to start maybe thinking outside the box. And I think as long as I respect that and I'm honest with him and we have these conversations, then I don't think that, you know, I'd hurt him in any way. I think for him, the lines are like, if you lie or cheat, then that's where things are bad.
But I think that's the whole point. You've got to work out what's okay for you as a couple, and forget the rules. You know, forget the rules completely and work out your own rules. And whether that involves monogamy, polyamory, affairs, whatever it is, just what you're comfortable with is the most important thing.
Every episode we ask our guest, and in this case our guests, How was it for you? Did you enjoy doing it? Have you learned anything along the way? Like, have you had fun?
Yeah, I loved it. It was so good. So interesting. I think I learned loads.
I loved it, and now I'm going to try and incorporate a coronavirus fantasy when I rank it.
Oh my God, that's
Love it.
amazing.
Can I just say, I think what you two are doing are so fucking cool.
It's so
I just
cool.
love it.
It's so fucking cool.
If I had my mum on a sex podcast, mic drop, work done, or like a future child, I'd love it. I think it's great.
Oh, thanks,
It's
guys.
fun.
Can I just ask one question, Kate?
Yes,
Was it dinner table? Like, how did you, when you found out your mum was a sex therapist? How cool? Or did you think how cool? Like, when did you sort of break that barrier? When were you like, oh my God, this is cool?
We just always talked about it, really. We just always talked about sex.
So you had it normalised from a much younger age, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I want. People often ask me, they're like, "Oh, what was it like talking to?" I don't know why they're like this. Like, why do they sound like this? Yeah,
They just put on the funny accent.
yeah, exactly.
Lads.
Yeah, exactly. But they're like, what was it? Because they imagine that we were talking about sex all the time. That obviously wasn't it. And also, they imagine that me and Mum and I'm like talking to my mum about specific, to me, subjective sex stuff, which isn't happening. That would be fucking weird. But from a young age, what we did talk, like, it was just at the dinner table, general things about sex, like you would talk about the coronavirus trend that you might have seen, which is fascinating. I remember when kids came round after school, whatever, and we'd be sitting around the table, and naturally, like, something like this would come up, and they'd look around the table and be like, "Oh my God, you're talking to your parents about sex," and that's when I'd be like, "This is a bit not normal."
But I think that's so healthy and cool, and that's what Rubina and I want to do with our children. If we have children, is just normalise it, and it passes the dinner table test chat, and it's not this like
Yeah, you're
secret,
very
seedy
lucky.
thing. You know, I think it's amazing.
Oh, I don't know how lucky I am. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
See you. Bye. Bye.
Goodbye.
It's the mailbag. Send Kate your queries to podcast@hatch.com. It's the mailbag. Send Kate your queries. Podcast@hatch with 2 T's.
Hello there, I have a query for Kate. I would like to know when the real sex education mailbag starts.
The real sex education mailbag starts right now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Poppy and Rubina. What fantastic guests. I love those guys so much.
Yeah, it was great.
It was so good. And I don't want to tease listeners too much, but when we finished recording with them, we just kept talking.
Yeah.
Because we just love talking about sex. So do they. And you can hear them talk about it more on Brown Girls Do It Too, their podcast. Make sure you check it out.
Absolutely.
Right, Mum, are you ready to answer some questions sent to us by listeners to podcast@hatch.com and using the hashtag RealSexEdu? Good. This first question we have is from Anonymous, and they ask, can HIV be passed on by sharing a toothbrush?
No is the answer. And the reason I think this has probably been asked is because there's been a lot of publicity around this topic. Because somebody who should know better said that you could get HIV from sharing a toothbrush, and it is simply not true. HIV is a very fragile sort of a virus, and it doesn't live very long in the outside world. It would just die off on a toothbrush, even if you use the toothbrush straight after somebody else. HIV isn't spread through saliva, so it would be very, very difficult to pick it up. You could, however, get all sorts of other conditions, including COVID-19, by sharing a toothbrush. So it's absolutely not to be recommended. I mean, the mouth is full of all sorts of bugs, just not HIV.
Good. Yeah, so don't share a toothbrush anyway if you can avoid it, because, you'll get something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
You like to emphasise the point, don't you?
Yeah, the way that I can show you that I understand what you've said
Yeah.
is by explaining it back to you as if it was my idea. Have you heard of mansplaining? All right, our next question comes from someone who'd rather not use their real name.
Okay.
And they've asked, my wife and I are overweight and we're really struggling to have sex. We're really frustrated. Have you got any tips?
Oh, yes, actually. It can be difficult to have sex if you're overweight. I suppose a lot depends on what you want to do. But some people find it quite exhausting, apart from anything else. So sometimes it's a good idea if this is is this a straight couple?
I think it's a man and a wife.
Okay.
Judging by the name, but obviously...
Okay, they want to be anonymous. So if the man sits in a chair, in a chair that has a lot of support for him, and he sits well back in the chair, his wife can sit upon his penis, can just sit back down onto his erect penis. The most comfortable way is to face away from him. But that means that he has free hands to caress her body and vulva and breasts, and that can be really, really pleasant. Another way is to place lots of pillows under her or another guy, if that's what you were doing, presenting their nether regions to the person who stands behind them to penetrate. Because you can the guy can lean forward onto the bed, and hopefully the woman or the other man is well supported.
Fantastic. And just to use one of your words again, I'm sure that would be very pleasant. I'm sure it would. So lots of things to try there, and hopefully they'll all be pleasant. Right, brilliant. That's that. Another pod in the bag. Thank you so much to Poppy and Rubina for taking the time to come and see us. It was bloody fantastic. Thank you so much.
It was very pleasant.
It was very pleasant. It was exceedingly pleasant. It was as pleasant can be. I feel like the problem with pleasant is I feel like it very much has a ceiling. You can only be so happy with pleasant. There you go. Anyway, it was more than pleasant, Poppy and Rubina. It was great. It was orgasmic. Thank you, as ever, to Cate Campbell for being our guiding light in all matters sex and relationships. Thank you, Mum.
And thank you, Diggs, for a wonderful show.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. We really, really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Real Sex Education, which is hosted by Diggory Waite and Cate Campbell. The show is produced by Andy Goddard and Diggory Waite. The Real Sex Education is a Hat-Trick podcast. If you'd like to hear more podcasts by Hat-Trick, including Time Ghost with Alexander Armstrong and Ben Miller, just search Hat-Trick Podcasts on your podcast provider of choice. This podcast is based on the real-life relationship between Diggory Waite and his mother, registered sex therapist Cate Campbell. The show is therefore inspired by, but otherwise unrelated to, the TV show Sex Education. But, yes, Diggory does wish his co-host was Gillian Anderson.